Hello, good evening, everyone. Hello, Kieran. How are you doing?
I'm good, yes. And you might hear some helicopter noises, everyone. So, yes, I live close to the airport, so that can happen.
Yeah, nice to see you. Nice to see everyone. Kieran and I caught up at the Scottish Currency Group conference in Dunfermline at the weekend. We don't often get the chance to see each other in person, so it was nice for us to catch up. You were on the channel at the end of the event as well. It was nice for us to catch up. You were on the channel at the end of the event as well. It was nice for us to catch up. You were on at the Yep, as you could hear, there was some terrible feedback there. Kieran, I don't know if you've got the YouTube channel open or anything else, but that was just really, really reverberating. Anyway, Kieran and I can chat at the end. We've got a brilliant film with Diana Finch, who who took over as chief executive of the Bristol Pound. It's about 45 minutes, this video. There's absolutely loads in there for anyone who's interested in the idea of a complementary currency, or maybe Scotland even moving towards its own currency. Anyone who's interested in how you set up a small organisation that has that's trying to have a powerful and positive impact on the community. If anyone's involved in the startup space and wants to see how other fintech companies do, absolutely loads in this interview, and we're really lucky to have Diana on with us again. It's the second time she's spoken. Just to say thanks for everyone who's joining us live, and we really appreciate your support. Please do drop comments and questions in the comments section, because tonight Diana's going to join us when we start the video, and she's going to be able to answer your questions. So rather than having Kieran and I dip in and answer any direct questions to Diana on anything she says, drop in the chat and she should be able to answer. Enjoy the interview, and Kieran and I will see you in about 45 minutes. Diana Finch, thank you so much for joining us on SCOTONOMICS for a second time. Do you know, we've not had many people on the show twice in the 2 years we've been doing it, so thanks very much for coming back.
Wow, to us. I'm honoured to be asked back.
Well, what we're going to speak about is this wonderful book which I started reading today, and I think you've told a really interesting story in a really engaging way, and I'd really encourage everyone to have to find this and read it. I think there's loads that can be taken from this, and that's hopefully what we're going to get into today. So my first question, Diana, is who did you write this book for? And you know, it's about the story of the Bristol Pound, but so much more. But who was the audience?
Well, I said to the publisher, you know, I want this to be for everybody. I think one of the problems is that most people don't feel able to talk about economics. I mean, frankly, I don't feel able to talk about economics as it's usually spoken about, because, you know, you need a lot of knowledge. It feels a lot of technical vocabulary, a lot of interest rates and blah blah, and hedge funds and futures markets, and it's like, you know, I have no idea, quantitative easing, but for me, actually, the real problem is there's something wrong with our economic system. Yeah, every day we see more and more homeless people on the streets. There are more and more people using food banks. We have, you know, wars now starting up all over the world. Some of those at least are about economic reasons or commodities or whatever, or about ancient power imbalances that come from our colonial past, and yeah, it's like there's something wrong. And then the environmental problem as well, where we are using far more of our resources and dirtying our atmosphere and our waters. You know, there's something hugely wrong with this drive for growth and continually increasing our impact on planet Earth, whilst not actually meeting everyone's needs.
I think the best place to start is just you explaining the Bristol Pound was a complementary currency. Could you just explain kind of generally what a complementary currency is, and then perhaps talk about what made the Bristol Pound different, and certainly, you know, to my mind, one of the most successful, if not the best well-known complementary currency that we've had?
I think you're right that it's one of the most well-known around the globe. Complementary just means it goes alongside something. In other words, it was never designed to be we'll put all of Bristol's economy into this. We won't need sterling or any other kind of money, right? It was always something which was an alternative. More specifically was a localization currency, because different kinds of currency might be to do different things, right? You design a tool for a purpose, and this was designed around localization. So the idea was you could take your normal money, convert it into Bristol pounds, and then you could only spend those Bristol pounds with Bristol Pound business members. And they had to be local businesses. And then those businesses could spend the money on, again, with other local businesses in their supply chain. So the idea was we'd convert this money into the Bristol pounds, and that pot of money circulating would gradually increase and be circulating within that economy, that localized economy. And gradually that would be doing more and more good for the local economy.
Well, I was aware of the Bristol Pound, but I wasn't actually aware that it was a fiat currency. It wasn't a fiat currency in the sense that it was backed 100% by sterling. So you got the pound by exchanging a pound sterling for a Bristol pound. I wasn't actually aware of that, and that kind of came as a surprise that I hadn't noticed that before. The concept of velocity that you cover at the start of the book I thought was really interesting, and it's maybe something that people might be aware of. But can you explain to us the importance, what a velocity is when we're talking about currency and why it's so important?
The idea of velocity is, if the money is stationary in your account, like let's say you've got some money in your account, I've got some money in my account, you've got £10, I've got £20. And if at the end of 3 days' time, we've not done anything, nothing has happened, you've still got that money, I've got this money, nothing has happened. The only time a currency is useful is when I give you 20 quid because you've come and put up some shelves for me, and then you give me some money back because I've cut your hair very badly, and then and it's those transactions, it's the movement of money that is the important thing. We often think that what matters is how much money we've got in the bank, and that might matter to us personally, but in economic terms, it's the movement of money that creates the value. It's the transaction that makes me give you some money that matters. That's the important thing economically, not how much money is sitting in my account or how much money is sitting in your account.
Yeah, no, that is really interesting, because there's within economics there's an understanding that what's good for the individual, which is saving, isn't good for the wider economy, which is saving. I think Keynes had identified this. But one thing is, obviously, if money's in your account, it's good for the person who has money because it's gaining interest, but it's not doing anything for the wider society. And a really important point here is that a lot of people think that you have to have savings for you to have investment, or for businesses to invest. And this is a kind of classic orthodox approach to money and the value of money. So an orthodox economist would say, no, it's actually good for you to have savings because it's savings that creates investment. But an orthodox economist like me would say, no, actually, that's not how it works. It's investment that creates savings. So having money and not doing anything in society is not beneficial.
And indeed, most of the investment really doesn't come from people who've already got the money. A lot of the investment in the way money is created is through debt. That's the main pump into the system of economic value, if you like, is through the creation of debt. So the idea that savings is what's important is just not, it's not true.
Yeah, this is the loanable funds model that orthodox economists talk about, which is that it's your savings that creates investment, and we can easily debunk that. But you actually said in the book that explaining this to the board became quite difficult, didn't it? These types of conversations, and trying to say to them things like, no, you don't understand, all money's debt. So you kind of covered that a little bit in the book. What was the general kind of economic understanding of the people who were involved at the start before you came on a little bit later? Because you do cover that within the book.
Yeah, so I mean, at the start, they were definitely all people who had been thinking, the 5 founders had been thinking very deeply about the economy, and they were very much aligned about the need not only to have this kind of localization currency, but also to address money creation and specifically how small businesses could be helped with cash flow and investment avoiding the need for so much bank debt by having a credit clearing circle. And that was very much part of the initial vision. We never got that off the ground. A lot of time and effort was put into that by my predecessors, and indeed much of the funding that the organisation was given was to develop a mutual credit solution. And why didn't it get off the ground? I mean, I think those kinds of interventions work best when banks are really not working. At times when there is such a deep recession or depression that banks have got nervous about lending money, then you tend to have this liquidity shortage. And so if we think back to other famous local currency experiments of the past, like the Virgil in the 1930s, and the Banca de Palmas as well in Brazil, these have worked because there was no liquidity. And so there was suddenly a need for people to take unbacked currency, if you like, or mutual credit type solutions where if you're holding a pound, it doesn't mean there's a pound in a bank somewhere. A kind of a pound doesn't mean that anyway, but that is the impression we have, that when we hold a pound, there's a pound in a bank somewhere that is related to it.
That's really a real theme throughout the first half of the book. Exactly, is that you seem to have an organization that was trying to do two very different things, and this was kind of pulling the organization apart. So we've covered briefly both of those things. The pound was a complementary currency. It was there to help business keep money in the community and supported by local businesses. I think everyone kind of understands the role of that. To just briefly explain what this kind of extra kind of credit part or element of the kind of idea initially.
This mutual credit idea or credit clearing circle. I mean, imagine if I owe you £10 and you owe me £10. I don't actually have to pass you a £10 note and then you pass me a £10 note. We can just go, oh, we're quits, right? And you can imagine bigger and bigger loops where even if we didn't all, even let's say there were 10 businesses in a loop, and you can imagine an easy situation where they all have an invoice for £100 that needs paying from the next one and the next one and so on. And then you can imagine you might need a system to kind of go, oh, hey, we can just cancel this out because it's all the same. And if the amounts in invoices are different amounts, then it's the amount of the lowest invoice that can be kind of knocked off the bottom of that. Yeah. And you can reduce, therefore, several things. One, you can reduce the amount of time between you issuing an invoice and it being paid on your system, because mutual credit, you don't have to wait for someone to get their cash flow to improve so that they pay you, and then your cash flow is improved and then you can pay the next person. You can just instantaneously kind of go, okay, these things are cleared. But also, if there is a remainder, actually less money is needed. Quite a lot of work has been done, and automated versions of this. I don't know if you've come across the work of Thomas Fleischmann, but he's done a lot of work with algorithms. So you don't even need a currency, a mutual credit currency. You can just do it by algorithm and go, okay, well, you can mark that as paid and this as you don't have to pay it anymore. You can mark, and actually the reliance on bank money, the bigger the system, the greater the amount of bank money that is not required is, if that makes sense. It's two negatives, which makes it a bit difficult to understand.
What was this project trying to achieve?
And there are two economic ideas, I guess. One is the idea of the local multiplier effect, which says if you trap the money in the system, it's going to go round faster. Each pound is going to do more work, if you like, and that is the boost to the economy of the local multiplier effect. Or allied to that is the idea of leakage. If I go and do my shopping at Lidl's and Tesco's, a little bit of money goes to pay the staff in that store, but most of the rest of the money has instantly left the local economy. It's gone to national, international supply chains, to head office, to shareholders, who knows where. And that money is
that figure, Diana. I think that figure is approximately around about 60% that leaves the local economy, isn't it? On average, around about that.
It varies a lot. It can be more than that. It can be less. It depends on, for example, is that land where the Tesco's or whatever is based, is that locally owned or not? You know, so there are a number of factors which determine, which change that figure. But yeah, a lot of money definitely leaves the local economy, and so the idea is that by having a local currency, and encouraging people to shop only locally, you're trapping more of that money within the local system. And you know, if I'm a little shop owner and my profits go up, I'm likely to reinvest those profits right here in Bristol, in this case, and open up a sister shop in the next door neighbourhood, right? Whereas actually, if it's Lidl getting all that money and all those extra profits, who knows where they're going to build their next shop? You know, it's not going to have any positive impact on Bristol. So that's one element. The other element is bringing consumption and production closer together geographically. And I guess this is an environmental thing, right? A lot of our fossil fuel use is around transportation. And the less we need to transport stuff all around the world, the better that is for our carbon emissions and for global warming. So yeah, it was about bringing consumption and production closer together to cut down transport emissions.
The first one, for me, really strikes a chord with the idea of community wealth building.
Yes.
And I'd quite like to what's your kind of, maybe not definition, but your kind of description of a society that's focused on community wealth building?
I mean, to me, this is about wealth, in a way, is about economic power, isn't it? And the more we can keep money in our local communities and hopefully use that to meet people's needs better. You know, like a city like Bristol has got a lot of rich people and a lot of very poor neighborhoods, often right up against each other. And I remember seeing early on a picture of Bristol with the kind of indices of deprivation, and you know, just being aware of what a checkerboard Bristol is. And certainly that aim of community wealth building is to try and even things out a bit and give more opportunities to the people who are struggling at the bottom. And I remember with Bristol City Council having a meeting with them, and they were upset because a lot of the individual members of the Bristol Pound were quite well off. You know, they were people in managerial positions or wealthy retired people with time and money on their hands often. And they were saying, you know, this isn't really what we're about, trying to make everybody wealthy. You know, and this is a club for rich people. And I said, well, no, it's not, because the beneficiaries are the businesses. And if you look at the postcodes of the beneficiaries of the businesses, they're all mainly in the poorer areas of the city. You know, over 50% were in the bottom 50% of neighborhoods by indices of deprivation. So actually, it was doing the right thing. It was funneling money from richer people to poorer neighborhoods. So it was trying to do that. It's difficult to prove how effectively it was doing it. And whilst £1 million a year being transacted through the system sounds like a lot, at a macro level, it's nothing. You know, it wasn't enough to really shift the dial. But you know, that was the aim of it, certainly.
Yeah, I know in the book you said that one of the issues was that you didn't control the data. So it had to be kind of underwritten, if that's maybe a poor phrase, by a local credit union, which meant they had to have all the data. So you were kind of scratching around a little bit to know who was the beneficiary and where the money was going and things like that. That must have been a big issue for you and a real frustration.
Yeah, I remember early on just saying, you're asking me to manage a currency with sort of one arm up behind my back and you know, one eye covered. It's like, you know, I don't really have many ways to control this. I mean, the reason that happened was that because we wanted to be citywide, be recognised by the local authority, we needed to have that kind of belt and braces, fully regulated right from the get-go, so that we could be taken seriously. But that meant we had to basically get someone to provide that regulated back end. And we chose Bristol Credit Union, who are keen to work with us, which was fantastic in many ways, and got us off the ground and got us with that regulated kind of seal of approval, if you like. But because they were the regulated entity, they controlled all the data. And their license would have been at risk if they had let us have that data. So it was very difficult for all concerned, because you're right. I could see who the members were. I could say the business members are in these locations. Could I say this percentage of the money was going to businesses in this area? No, I couldn't, because I didn't have that data.
When we're discussing community wealth building, I always say to people that in our economy we focus too much on the flows, and what community wealth building does is concentrate on the stocks in terms of the ownership, who owns the assets, and because that, as you said there, gives you a much more powerful position when you're thinking about the local community and your control over that. And I think it's really important that when we are speaking about community wealth building, we focus on how do we build these assets and make sure they're owned by part of the community. My background before I started doing all this stuff, I used to help startups in the events space. So I was reading this book and I was thinking this could easily be a story about a fintech startup, a financial technology startup. You had all the same problems, all the same kind of ups and downs and highs and lows. And I suppose just a simple question: when the organization was set up, did they feel like a fintech startup, or did they feel much more like a not-for-profit, community-based organization?
I think near the beginning, it felt much more like economic activism, community-based economic activism. And indeed, I think I would be right in saying before my time, we would have said, no, we're definitely not a fintech, because that would have given like a very different feel to the organization. If we had said, oh yeah, we're another fintech, with the next Monzo or Revolut, or, it's like that wasn't at all what we wanted to be perceived as. It did change a bit, because when we had to move at one point out of the corn market, corn exchange, into we had to find new premises, and I applied for Set Squared, which was a university incubator space at Engine Shed by the station. And in order to qualify, we had to be a fintech. So I rapidly, no, we are a fintech. We don't talk about it in that way.
Well, that's what all startups do. They're so malleable, and they're certainly able to, if you've got money, we'll happily fit into that. And again, in the book, I was quite surprised by the amount of money that you were able to get. I mean, I think maybe I'm off in my kind of calculations, but I think overall, you had grants and funding of close to £1 million maybe for the project. Is that about right?
Yeah, I should think so. If you add it all up over the course of many years, I reckon £1 million is around it. Which was great. One of the big chunks of money came from European Union. There was a grant fund called DigiPay, and that was we were a kind of partner in that. It was really administered by Stroh, who developed Cyclos, which was the front end of the kind of payment platform that we were using. And that money was very much about developing mutual credit systems across Europe,
rather than the complementary currency side.
Yes, exactly. And then the next big batch of money came from Partners for a New Economy, which again was very interested in the mutual credit side of things and zero interest loans, things of that nature. But they were also looking at how do you develop an infrastructure which has got both of these capacities, and how do you iterate that? What is the tech needed, and what are the how do we share the learning and the inspiration as well?
Would it be fair to say that there was more interest in the kind of credit clearing circle aspect than there was in the complementary currency in terms of funders and kind of money that was available?
In terms of the funding, yes, the vast majority of the funding really was looking at that. And it's hard to know whether that's just because that was the next exciting thing that a lot of funders, especially in Europe, were interested in, or whether it's just that because we'd already got Bristol Pound off the ground with almost no funding. I don't know how we did that. And funders always want to fund the new thing, the thing you haven't yet done.
Yeah, the new.
And it was very frustrating because we had this nascent, tiny thing that we were trying to incubate and, nurture, and it needed money. And we kept having to kind of, take a little bit of the money that, it's like, it was very difficult, basically, because the funding was really to do with all the other stuff. And that put a great deal of stress on the organization and meant that people were spread very thinly.
I've got to the kind of almost the before, the real highs of setting everything up. And you mentioned Donella Meadows in your introduction, who was one of the authors of Limits to Growth. Now, I'm a huge fan of her writing, especially a paper that she does on leverage points. I would love to say that I'm able to take Donella's approach to problems. How I would love to be able to do that, but I'm able to put her kind of template over it. And I just looked at, all the effort and the money and the structure that went into this to find a leverage point, which was, how do we ensure that more money stays in the local community? Taking that kind of leverage approach, I was wondering, do you think there would have been a better way? Was there a leverage point that might have been simpler, easier to push, that would have achieved those objectives? I'm thinking off the top of my head, something like getting credit unions much more engaged in lending within Bristol, or making sure that people were paying cash rather than paying on their credit card because of the leakage that goes to MasterCard and Visa and stuff like that. Do you think, looking back in your engagement, were there any kind of other leverage points that kind of jump out at you that might have helped in an easier way achieve those kind of objectives?
Yeah, so I've worked with a variety of organisations who've tried to work at different places, from government and kind of, NGOs, through local authorities, which is a lot of what Bristol Pound was trying to do, through to the kind of grassroots thing, which was also what Bristol Pound was trying to do. And I do think really that the grassroots is the only place from which we can really have an impact in many ways, because so many of the players higher up in the system, they are constrained by taxes and the kind of the methods they have of raising money and the things they have to deliver, but also, especially at the national level of government, they're very impacted by the large corporates who have a lot of power, partly in things like lobbying, but also governments get sued by large corporations the whole time for messing with their business models, by changing policies and things. And so actually governments have their hands tied. You're not going to get the large corporates changing their mind. Well, I don't know, people like Donnie McClurkin at the Post Growth Institute, he manages somehow or other to get some airtime, to get some credibility going with the large corporates. But I think it's really difficult because turkeys don't ever vote for Christmas, so it's difficult to get engagement there. At the end of the day, if you and me both don't buy Coca-Cola tomorrow, that is felt pretty quickly by Coca-Cola Inc. Yeah. And so I do feel that the place where we've got the most power, even though we perceive we have no power individually, is at that grassroots level. I think the real problem is that we didn't know how to motivate those people, how to get them on board with this. And that's partly about marketing, maybe, because our marketing was ideological in nature. It said, if you think like us, come and join the Bristol Pound. And we didn't know how to talk to people that didn't think like us. It didn't make any sense to them. But also, let's just compare it with some of the local currencies in South Korea, where they're using the local currency to give out things like universal basic incomes and social benefits. And so they are using the local currency as a tool to on the one hand, they are delivering social benefit and alleviating poverty. But on the other hand, as that money is spent, they're basically giving a boost to the local economy, which then raises more taxes for the, it's a positive cycle, but it takes a local government to then say, oh, okay, let's use this as an infrastructure tool. And our approach really to the Bristol Pay ideas that came later was much more thinking about how do we make an infrastructure tool that the big anchor institutions, not just the local authority, but the universities, the hospitals, that they will say, here is a tool that we can use that's going to help us achieve our broader aims.
I think you're really getting to the heart of agency. And, and I really feel that actually, if me and you don't buy Coca-Cola tomorrow, no one makes it, no one notices. If 1,000 of us don't buy, no one notices. If 10,000, maybe 100,000 stop buying, no one notices. And I really believe that we have to understand that our agency is much more powerful when it's delivered through larger organizations, and also I think our lobbying has to be, in a sense, we have to say to people, these organizations need to change. It's not about me changing as an individual because I have so little agency within that. So I think that was an interesting discussion on agency. Now the story's clearly got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I'm definitely, in reading the book today, I'm just at start of the middle. Would you like to give us a little bit of, I suppose, a little bit more detail about what happened once the pound was up and running? People were using it. You had an amount of money coming in. You obviously had some tension with the two different types of parts of the organisation, the credit aspect and the pound. Where are we when you start to take over the kind of middle of the story?
So at the point, well, it's a little bit past the middle when I take over. So in fact, the reason that I was taking over was that tension had basically played itself out. There was no longer any mention of us trying to do mutual credit. Some people had left, and there was a bit of a void and the need to kind of redefine where we were going on the journey. And there was no more grant money. So whatever we had in the bank was what I had to play with. And we didn't receive, from the moment I joined, I think we had £5,000 to run an event from Friends Provident Foundation, and no other money came in apart from seniorage income from the currency itself, and we had a tax rebate which helped at some point as well. So we tried. I took a year looking at what's going wrong basically, and I realized, okay, marketing is going wrong because we only appeal to a very small niche of people. And so we tried to address that. It was a hassle for businesses instead of a help for businesses. So we tried to redefine what we could do for businesses to actually be more useful to them and provide more value. And we tried that out for a year or so. But as I say, by autumn 2019, I was basically saying to the board, we're not going to be printing any more of these notes. We have to think about what we do next. And I said, we have to keep the organisation going until the end of the current pound, which was 2021, the printed pounds that were out there. And the question is, what do we do during that time? Do we just spend as little money as possible and then just hand whatever funds are left back to the transition network, which was what was in our, if any unspent funds would have gone back to them? Or do we try and do another experiment and try and work up what comes after the Bristol Pound? And the board said, yeah, let's try and see what comes next. Let's try and do something useful with our last 2 or 3 years of money that remains. And so that was what we did. We started to think, okay, with those learnings from the Bristol Pound, then what? What do you do next?
I'd love to know, what did you do next?
So we started off thinking maybe we should be doing more for small businesses. I did a bit of work with the University of Bath thinking about the SDGs and businesses and how we could create some kind of system that was also going to flag up to consumers which businesses are taking the SDGs seriously, for example. We played with those ideas for a bit, but we just thought that it's a very crowded place to be. There's a lot of organizations offering.
We're talking about the UN's Sustainable Development.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, yes, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so we kind of let that go. And I said, I think the clue is in the name, Bristol Pound. We should be doing something about money. But there was a big learning, which was, which I've mentioned already, we can't onboard people at scale if we have an ideological argument for why people should get involved, because we'll only ever get the 0.02% of the population that think like us joining. And if we want to create something that creates impact at scale, then we need to be doing it differently. The other thing that maybe was a big learning point is that, viewed in another way, what the Bristol Pound was a behaviour change project. It was about trying to get people to change their purchasing behaviour and spend their money differently. Well, now, if we think about our overall impact in socioeconomic and environmental terms, actually how we spend our money is just one part of the equation. There are lots of things that we do every day where we are impacting on society around us and on the environment. And those things are largely invisible to us. We've kind of got to the point where we tend to only take decisions. And indeed, the whole nudge economics, the nudge unit at number 10, when it was developed, it was all founded on the premise that we are economically driven people who make decisions largely on the basis of our back pocket and how we're going to be better off. And actually, there's quite a lot of research that suggests that that's not the case. I read Dan Ariely and James Heyman's work with some interest, which maybe we haven't got time to go into now, but it made me realize, okay, actually, if we're going to do a behavior change project, maybe it's not about giving people bits of money.
Well, it's interesting because that's, you say there's evidence there, but that underpins the whole of the orthodox school of economics, that price, that we are not some kind of rational being that just looks at everything and puts a pound value on it and does that. So that is interesting. And I think that draws me back to this point about leverage, because, it's kind of like, if you want to change people's behavior, if that's the ultimate aim, was there a better way to do that than the whole kind of infrastructure and everything with the pound? If there was different objectives, then the complementary currency might have been absolutely the best thing to do.
Coming from that first idea of we can't onboard people through ideology, we thought, okay, let's have a payment platform that is completely, it's not about localization, or let's come up with something that everyone gets. And we thought, well, everyone gets making money for the charity sector, right? And I think everyone knows that as local authorities have had less and less money, there's been more and more reliance on charities and voluntary sector organizations to pick up the slack. So, and we thought, since the development of e-money and legislation around e-money institutions, we thought, okay, we could have an e-money platform where the actual cost of transactions to us are extremely low, basically nil. There's some money for onboarding people, or some costs to onboarding people, but not costs for transactions. So we could run an e-money payment platform that is very cheap, but price it to go with normal, just as a slight undercut maybe to the normal Visa, MasterCard payment networks. And having looked at the numbers, if we manage to get 5 to 10% penetration in a city the size of Bristol, including getting things like supermarkets and stuff on board, we had the potential to be raising in the region of £5 million a year for the local voluntary sector, which is actually not bad. That's actually
And this is what we spoke about when we interviewed you like a year and a half ago. It was around Bristol Pay, and I remember at the time thinking, this is a fantastic idea, because there seems like a real demand for it. It kind of ticked all of those kind of startup boxes. And so where did we end up with Bristol Pay then?
So we never managed to get it off the ground, but alongside the payment system, there was going to be this kind of, was thinking about non-financial values and thinking about how could we make visible so that people can make decisions better about, shall I jump in the car today or shall I go by bus? Oh, I think I'll try and have a shorter shower. Oh, I think I'll try and rewild some of my garden and give up using Roundup in the garden. These are the kinds of things that we were thinking about, where we could make a big impact on environmental things, but also social things. We had the idea of having a thanks token, which you could think of as being a bit like time banking. But the difference with time banking is that it's still a market, right? I have to do something and then I earn some time credits and then I spend them. And we had the idea of having a thanks token that is distributed through a universal basic income of thanks tokens, so that you're not constrained in that way. But you can still have all the fun of, hey, I've got loads of thanks tokens because I've been really lovely and done lots of nice things. So we were really looking at how could we create data that give you that feeling of collaboration around social and environmental goals for the city, and see everybody taking part. And this was why we thought it would be very useful for universities and the council and all the rest of it, because all these big institutions have lofty aims about zero carbon and whatever, making the world a better place, but actually it's very difficult for them to deliver it without some tools, some engagement tools. And so we saw Bristol Pay as being, yes, it could raise money for the voluntary sector, and that would probably, having done some market research, we knew that was a winner. But at the same time, we would have this kind of game alongside it, which is not at all operating on market principles. It's operating much more like Duolingo or a Fitbit, in terms of that joy of participation. But unlike a Fitbit, that data being like, oh, wow, I'm one of 3,000 people in Bristol at the moment trying to have a 3-minute shower every day. And we've probably saved this many gallons of water and this much gas. Heating it up to shower.
Gamification, I think, would be the technical startup
exactly.
term. Well, that's all really interesting. And again, I wanted to say how good this book is, but also I wanted to say, I think if the organisation at the start had set some different objectives and realised that the scope that they could ever get to, I think at the end of the project, they might have been really, really happy with what they achieved. And I think just it's often that the objectives were just unachievable, which meant that the success that you had was never really appreciated. But I think that how valuable this has been, I've come across the Bristol Pound so many times within academic literature speaking about it. The chief executive of the council took his payment in it, all of these things, all the other currencies. I think it was really inspirational, and I'm sure you did a lot of good in the city for the time it was working. That's my final question. Is there an awareness of that, or do people look back and think we didn't really achieve anything?
I think all the founders know they achieved something amazing. If you'd asked any of them in 2015, they would all go, this is beyond our wildest dreams. And okay, it didn't last, but I think most of them knew right from the beginning, really, that this was an experiment, and it was much more about creating a vision of the possible, rather than, oh, this is going to fix all of our economic problems. It could never really have done that. Ideally, it would have maybe grown to a bigger size and had a bit more longevity and still been there for us to do other experiments on, if we view currency as infrastructure, if you like. So I don't think it was a total failure. I think it was an experiment well worth doing. And I think there are lots of experiments that are still worth doing in this area of economic activism, if you like, or use of currency and tokens to help shift how we operate as society. And I guess my parting word would be this: a lot of people think that economics is about markets and money and finances and whatever, but if you look at the Wikipedia definition of economics, there's no mention of money or markets or finance or anything. It says it's a system of getting the resources for production and then distribution. So it's a kind of governance system for planet Earth. And our current market economic system is not an appropriate governance system for planet Earth. It is not doing what it's supposed to do, which is look after and steward the resources of planet Earth and look after the people. It's not doing either. So, there's a lot of work to be done, and we need to experiment outside the current system.
What you've said there is the heterodox view of economics. It is the resources and the allocation of what we call the social surplus. There's no market, there's no prices, there's nothing in there. That's a very, very narrow part of the economic discipline that considers us all as these, automatons who are driven around just looking at prices and calculating all of the options in our head. I mean, a real takeaway for me from this discussion was understanding what money is and the role that it plays. And, you know, you spoke about how you looked at that and thought, how can you solve all of these problems with currency, with money? And when you're from a kind of orthodox perspective, you just look at this thing as a medium of exchange. You know, it's even to the point it's given so little kind of economic value, in the sense that it's not included in a lot of models that model our economy, because it's just seen as completely transferable, and it's just something that, you know, you exchange for another commodity.
Precisely the problem. Most money is too fungible. You know, actually what creates the power is some limits to the fungibility, actually. And the point I make at one point in the book is that, you know, actually things of real value are not fungible. You know, we can't say a world peace, you know, for 3 years is worth this much, and cleaning up the oceans is worth that much. You know, it's like, and you certainly can't say, well, we'll have this much world peace for this much ocean cleaning. It's like, what are you talking about? You know,
to even engage in that. I often say to people that they need to think about money as a technology.
Exactly.
And it's not a commodity. It's something that enables other things to happen. And
I think it's an infrastructure tool. And I think there could be others. And, you know, I think the whole kind of tokenomics thing could be about developing a much more, you know, recognizing money for the infrastructure project it is, and then saying, and here are some other, you know, here's a broader approach to that infrastructure to enable us to account for other value better, to, you know, for example, to truly understand what's happening, and how our environment is being degraded, why people are increasingly put into poverty, you know, because it's made so invisible by money, because money is too fungible and treats everything as the same. We need that differentiation if we're going to understand the flows of value and destruction of value better. But, you know, all of these things are useful, and we need to be running some of these experiments. We need to get them funded, and we need to be trialing them in some cities and some different places, and we need to gather that data and see, you know, what works. You know, until we've done the experiments, we don't know what works.
And for me, resilience is so important, and you become, as a society, become much more resilient when you do a lot of things differently. You know, and that's one of our real weaknesses about our economy, is that, you know, when you tap your card, it's only going to go to 1 or 2 organizations, and, you know, and you're not using cash now. All those things are a real concern. When people buy this book, Dan, I've got a question for you. Do they also get a Bristol Pound, or was this a little treat for me?
That was a little treat for you.
Oh, thank you.
But all of the people that supported the crowdfunder, they got a free little Bristol Pound in there. But yeah, no, stocks are running very short. There are still some souvenirs you can buy, but yeah, no, I'm afraid not.
Well, thank you. I'll treasure that. I'm actually going to get it framed. I've got 3 really old Scottish pounds that I found when my mum and dad moved out of their house. I'm going to put this on it as well. So thank you for that, and thank you for spending time with us tonight. Hopefully, I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you for recommending the book. I really appreciate it.
Diana, thanks everyone for all the comments. That was great. And Diana, thank you so much for jumping on and answering all those questions. I think that added a lot of value to our interview. Thank you very much for that. Anything else you want to throw in, Diana? Go for it. Thank you. Kieran, what's your thoughts on watching the interview?
So I took lots of notes. I think it's important to let the audience know that the Bristol Pound came out of the transition time movement, and when Tayport in 2008, I started a transition time Tayport, and that started to really think about what a currency was then. And the Bristol Pound was already up and running by the time I got involved in that, so it was really well known as something that was happening. And also Lewis and Sussex were doing it as well, and I think there was somewhere else down in the south that were doing it too. But the Bristol Pound was the most important one. But she brings up the point of the value coming from velocity. I think that's part of the value. I think the value also comes from the place, or the placement of where money goes. And I think that brings us back to that localism, spending local as well. which is so important if you want to maintain currency circulating in your local economy, which we know is important for some places. If you're in Manchester and you're doing all your spending in London, then of course you're going to lose money out of Manchester. It's about making some informed choices, both on a personal level, but also your anchor institutions. We know this, that we have to be using our anchor institutions to maintain currency within their local areas as well. Also the point about money as a tool, but it's also a tool. My mum said to me when I was a young teenager, you vote with your purse. And what she was talking about was not buying goods from South Africa because of the apartheid regime. And I think that that's also something to think about when you're thinking locally as well. Now in Aberdeen, there is an organisation which takes money from all the businesses, and they try and promote the businesses as well. But what they've also done is they've created a card so that you can buy it at a local shopping centre, and it can only be spent locally. And the local council, the council that I'm in now, have given it so much funding at certain times to help boost the economy in the local economy. So that's people who are possessing the fiat currency are helping to keep money in the local economy. I mean, my feeling was, after listening to Diane after a while, was she should just stand. She should just stand either as a councillor or as MP, and then just funnel that fiat currency where it needs to go through political means.
Yeah. No, really, really good points. Any other comments and questions from those watching live? To pick up on one of your points, Kieran, around agency, and I think you identified those anchor institutions, and I think that's absolutely clear. And if you think about, for example, in Scotland, almost 40% of every single pound that's spent in Scotland is spent by the Scottish government. So, if there's 10,000 people or 100,000 people or 1 million people who are spending locally and who are really thinking about the purchasing power, that's still half of what the Scottish government as an institution spends. And I think identifying these institutions like councils, when we were talking a little bit about credit agencies, we need to find these organisations who've got agency, who've got lots of budget, who've got lots of power, and they can really help us ensure that the spending is kept locally. And, everyone talks about how well Preston have done, and that's really increasing the amount of money that's spent within the city, 5 miles of the city in the region. So agency, I think, is a really important point. Charles suggests that Diana should be Chancellor of the Exchequer. I think we both agree with that. Any other final comments or thoughts of any of the notes you made, or anything that springs to mind?
Yeah, the other thing that I've noted as well was the concept of the hassle it was, the Bristol Pound, for some of the businesses as well. Now, I had this experience also when my business was in Leith and the road was being dug up for the trams, and the local council, Edinburgh Council, were actually giving the local businesses tokens to help boost their business, or rather they were given tokens for the businesses through the council. But it did become an extra administration for us as well. So, but the card that is organised in Aberdeen is just a basic card, and you just use it, and then it's a much more simple system. So the simplicity is important.
I mean, that almost defines money down to a T. How easy it is, and how transferable it is, and trying to compete with a tenner is incredibly difficult. You've got to go over so many hurdles, and I think that was one of the issues that Diane covered. And when you read the book, it's really hard. That whole education process had to be done first before people realized what the benefits and what the difference was. A huge undertaking. And also Diane's just thrown in a lot more. There's a lot more options for tech, and there's regulation for local currencies these days. So that certainly, I'd imagine, helps and hinders that. But the beauty of the tenor is how easily is transferable and how everyone understands what it is. So it's difficult. I mean, we spoke again that's on the Patreon episode a little bit more about what could Scotland learn from this process in terms of thinking about a complementary currency, or then moving to its own currency. And Diane had some useful stuff, which unfortunately you can only see if you're a patron subscriber, but that's the benefit of being one of our patrons. Diane, thank you so much for the session and for jumping on the chat. We really appreciate that. I think that's it for tonight, folks. Next week we're going to go to a regular time. Kieran and I have finally decided on time, which is 8 o'clock on a Wednesday. So we're going to be back then. We've got a brilliant interview around energy, and we cover GB Energy with a Scottish policy person called Fraser. We go into a lot of detail. It was an interview I managed to do with him in Dundee just a few weeks ago. So that's a fascinating interview, really opening up the insights into what you can do with energy, who benefits from it, what's the role of the government, local authorities. It's a great interview. That'll be live at 8 o'clock next Wednesday. Thanks so much. Hopefully see you all then. Oh, and special thanks to the few people who are watching this who came to say hello, and thanks to Kieran and I for doing Scotonomics. It's really much appreciated, isn't it, Kieran?
Yeah, it's great. It was great to meet our fans at the Scottish Currency Conference. So yeah, and if people are interested in that, they will have another conference next year. So as will we. So
a lot going on next year. Thanks so much. See you next week.
Bye.